Major funding for these programs is provided by grants from First American Title Insurance Company of New York, Perfect Building Maintenance, Murray Hill Properties, Bank of America, SJP Properties, Allied Partners, Greenberg Traurig LP. Additional funding is provided by grants from Arbor Realty Trust, Antares Investment Partners, Athena Group, BRT Realty Trust, Burden LLP, CB Richard Ellis, City Habitats, City Investment Fund, Cushman and Wakefield, Eastern Consolidated, Essex Capital Partners, Gemini Real Estate Advisors LLC, HERRICK Feinstein, HELMSLEY Spear, Jackson Development Group, John Katzimatidis, Herbert J. Sims Company, James D. KUHN Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, Kilroy Metal Products, Madison Realty Capital, Marcus and Millichap, Meridian Capital Group, M&T Bank, MUSS Development LLC, Newmark Knight Frank, Palin Enterprises, Rosenthal and Rosenthal, Sidney FETNER Associates, Sheldrake Organization, Signature Bank, Studley, the Moynihan Organization, Triangle Services, the WITKOFF Organization, Extreme Contracting and Deconstruction.
Hello, my name is Michael Stoller, host of the Stoller Report, Real Estate Trends in the Tri-State Region. What's happening in the office market? You know, there are perception that since we are in a recession, and I don't care what anyone says, we are in a recession, that the market may be slow. But the office market is still vibrant and resilient in New York City. So today I brought together three people who really know what's going on in the office market. My guests today include Joe Harbert, the CEO of the Tri-State Region of Cushman and Wakefield, Mike Colaccino, president of Studley, and last but not least, you know, he's like the returnee. He's been with me too many times, a good friend, Ken Swig, who is the principal of Swig Equities, and also a leasing broker, being the president of HELMSLEY Spear. So this is a great time for owners. You know, you're an owner and you're a leasing broker. I mean, so tell me what's going on. What's happening with the office market, Ken?
I would have to say that...
I don't know which side I'm talking. Is it the left side is the owner or the right side is the broker?
That's the same thing as my wife always says. She doesn't know what side she's on. I would have to say that the market, the real estate market itself, the commercial market itself, is very strong and good. The problem that exists is more on the capital side, the banking side. But the real estate market, I think we're at a relatively an all-time low in vacancy rate. We are certainly at an all-time high in terms of rents in the city, and I think that combination tells you, you know, right there that we're in a pretty strong commercial market.
But what about with 60,000 layoffs? I mean, if you take, you know, 5,000 square feet per, you know, per space, I mean, isn't that going to lose some space? Joe, Mike?
60,000 layoffs. The question is where? You know, it would be very interesting to study how many layoffs actually occur that are announced by CEOs of major firms. We haven't seen a dramatic impact yet in New York City. Some layoffs, some sublet space trickling back into the market, but you're still around 1.2% on sublease vacancy, so it's not really significant yet.
Definitely hasn't happened yet. That's the key point, is the announcement lags or precedes the actual layoff, which precedes the actual delivery of space to the market. So I'd say we're in the second inning of a 9-inning game. And that the real impact of this is going to be in 2009. And I think if there's 60,000 white-collar jobs that are lost in New York, that could reflect as much as a 2 or 3% change in the vacancy rate, which would put you closer to the sort of frictional rate where prices will adjust.
Now, you represent most of your you represent tenants most of your time. You do both. You're a landlord and everything. How do you see tenants today? Are they apprehensive that they said, you know, maybe I'll wait a little while longer before I sign a lease because the landlord, like Mr. Swig, might reduce his rents? What's happening in that?
Well, the smart ones who started early enough to have an opportunity to reconsider I think are fairly tentative right now. Unfortunately, a lot of people tend to wait towards the end of the expiration, towards the end of the lease term, and as a consequence, they're being jammed by the necessity of doing something in this market and not being able to wait. So I think the answer is depends on how early you started. The ones who started early are definitely in sort of a circling mode, at least for the next few months.
So what do you mean by the circling mode?
I think they're waiting to see what's going to happen in terms of the next 3 or 4 months and whether there are going to be massive putbacks of space by Wall Street, by financial service firms in the good neighborhoods. I think that that's something that people are expecting to occur by September, October of this year.
You know, Kent, you have a lot of space in Lower Manhattan that you own as an owner. Are you seeing any reduction in demand, or?
Well, we're in a position right now where we actually don't have much space at all. So we've got the opposite problem. We've got buildings that are right now rented well below the marketplace, and our problem is that we need more space so we can circulate tenants through, and as tenants turn over, we'll get much higher rent. So at the moment, we have no space, and that's probably our biggest challenge that we're confronting. But one of the things I wanted to touch on that you mentioned is that maybe 60,000 layoffs. And are we in a recession, which I would agree to. Certainly we are. By the time the economists tell us we are, we know that we're coming out of it by then. But if you look historically at New York in the 1970s, I think we lost 680,000 jobs, which in a period of time, added on top of that obviously was the 1970s fiscal crisis. Then we built up. You know, we grew about, in the 80s, typically about 250,000 jobs. We lost between 89 and 91, 350,000 jobs. Okay. In March of 01 to December 01, we lost 250,000 jobs, which was about 9.8% of all of the American jobs lost. This time, if we're looking at 60,000 jobs relative to what's happened in the past, while it's very tough, it's minor compared to the numbers before. But probably equally important is that New York City is going into, or walking into, the recession with an unemployment rate that's 100 basis points less than the national average, where the other recessions that we went into, New York City led the recession. We had 100 basis points higher unemployment in each of those 3 instances than we do today. So it doesn't mean it's not going to be painful necessarily, but it certainly means that we're in a better position to withstand anything. And the job losses are predicted to be much less, and our unemployment rate is already as low as it's ever been. So I think it bodes well for New York City in terms of going through this recession.
But for a supply-constrained environment as well.
But for 2008, the magnitude of the number of transactions, you know, that have taken place this year as compared to 2006, 2007, aren't we down a little bit?
We're actually up in terms of large transactions. In the first quarter of the year, there were 15 deals done over 100,000 square feet. Compare that to what was reasonably a hotter market in 07. We had 2 deals done in the first quarter of that size. So large tenants are still out there, and we're finding that the bread and butter smaller tenants are out there as well.
Now, you said to me prior to the show that there's the large tenants still need space. There's a lag in the middle.
Yeah, we're sensing that there's a little bit of a hole in the middle of the market from maybe 30 to 150,000 square feet. I think those are some of the customers which are not big corporations, for whom these planning decisions take years, and they're going to look at those issues over a long period of time. These are people who are probably writing their own checks, and they're probably taking a little bit more cautious attitude towards the market right now.
Now, do you see that taking place with your clients?
I think that's fair to say. I mean, the larger firms do have the longest planning horizon, and therefore tend to a certain extent to be the ones that are subject most to market forces. Smaller firms can put on Band-Aids. They can do things to transition through a period like this in a way that a larger tenant can't. You know, if you're occupying an entire building and, you know, you're out of space or you have a lease expiration coming, you've got to do something. There's no 2 ways about it, regardless of the market. We
were talking about some of the suburbs, and, you know, certain people consider the Gold Coast, Gold Coast of Jersey City and Hoboken really a 6th borough of the city. Do you see any of the companies today jumping to Jersey City and Hoboken as they were a couple of years ago?
As I was saying before, I think that in 1993 and 94, almost every large tenant examined those markets, Westchester and Connecticut, with great intensity. In the last 10 years, people have wanted to be in Manhattan. They've moved to Manhattan rather than the reverse, and we haven't seen the number of searches in those markets. Most recently, we're finding that almost everybody that's out in the market today wants to at least take a look at the Jersey opportunity, and we're beginning to see people looking at Westchester as well. So yes.
Do you think that's because of the because Manhattan is so expensive? Is that?
That's what they tell us.
Yeah, I mean it's.
Plus
but
technology.
That's a reflection of a sign of potentially a very strong market.
But let's look at the difference. You know, for my audience, because I want to give them a perspective. Let's talk about. I mean, we're talking different areas. The Plaza District is the most expensive. What's the rent in the Plaza District?
North of $100.
Yeah, I'll buy with that.
North of $100. Midtown.
Class A, upper 80s.
90s.
Crazy numbers.
Okay, Flatiron.
50s and 60s.
50s.
Lower Manhattan.
I would say mid 40s to upper 40s.
So now we say Jersey City and Hoboken. What's the difference? How much can you save by going to Jersey City and Hoboken?
Not much. I mean, you're going to see rents in a similar range. The question is that, you know, obviously there are certain operations that can be split, and I don't see a lot of people that split operations between Midtown and downtown. Typically, you'd split operations and put them in Jersey because you get an additional issue of disaster recovery or protection from contingency by having back office operations on the other side of the river. Although not as much as you might think, but it is a thought process that people go through.
Now, what about the tenancies that, you know, you have the REIT benefits if you go to like Vornado's deal on 125th Street. I mean, when you look at the rents, they're going to be able to substantially gain something, any tenant over there. You have the REIT benefits if you go to Brooklyn, downtown Brooklyn, and if you go to Long Island City. Do you see?
And Lower Manhattan now has that too.
And Lower Manhattan. I mean, do you see tenants going to Long Island City? Do you see the Tishman Speyer project ever taking place, Gotham City, Gotham, whatever it's called, in Long Island City?
We see a lot of activity in Brooklyn at the moment.
I mean, you just completed a lease for Weil Gotshal, who's at 767 Fifth Avenue, probably whose rent is in excess, if they needed more space, in excess of $150 a foot, $130 a foot. And now they're moving to downtown Brooklyn into Metrotech for how much?
Well, a lot less than that.
I think it was publicly said about $35 to $40 a square foot.
Better you quoting it than me.
And then, and if you take $35 to $40 and you take a $12 benefit, they're basically down to $28 a square foot.
The numbers are compelling.
And as my friend Mr. Swig would say, if it's a partnership, it's coming down to the bottom line.
Absolutely.
But what do you see, and what's your thoughts about Long Island City? I know that, you know, the second tower at Tishman Speyer, the UN Credit Union, certain other towers. Do you see these potential office buildings being built in Long Island City in the near future? The other ones. I'm not talking about the ones that are completed right now.
We've had a great experience at Court Square. We're 100% leased. It's been a spectacular experience. We have a lot of activity on space that we're renting for MetLife. So there's a movement out there.
I'm a big fan of Long Island City. I mean, I don't think it's a 1 to 5 year basis. I think this is a, you know, more of a 10 to 20 year basis. But I mean, if I had money to park in land, I think the land there, relative to its potential value, is one of the better land holds. And you've got public transportation. You know, you've got the subway system that's there. It's, you know, a stop away from Manhattan. And I think would be New York City's fourth downtown if you've got Midtown, Lower Manhattan, Brooklyn, and
I mean, but Brooklyn, you know, Brooklyn, because of the Metrotech, has really been more established. I mean, Metrotech today is 20, 25 years. You know, it's an established area. Finally, there is, you know, becoming some residential construction on near Metrotech. There are about 3 major developments being built residentially over there. You don't really have that. You have it in Long Island City, but in a different area where there isn't the office space.
You're getting it more smaller projects and other things that are there. But it's, for me, I think it's a phenomenal opportunity. It's just, you have to be able to sit on the land for that period of time.
I'm going to respectfully partially disagree because I think it is good, but for the next cycle, and perhaps that's what Ken is saying, it's the next cycle. We have 44 million square feet of proposed development in Manhattan, if you add it all up and you assume everything goes forward. So I think you first have to resolve what's going to happen with the rail yards.
So let's talk. You know, you bring up a very good point. I'm happy you brought it up as opposed to me. We have 44 million square feet of development. You have the rail yards. You have... Potentially. You have the rail yards.
20 Times Square.
You have World Financial Center. On 8th Avenue alone, you have 11 Times Square, you have the Vornado building, you have the Boston Properties building, you have a variety of properties
Solo's
going,
project.
and you have Sheldon Solo on the East River. I mean, that's 44 million square feet.
But is it all going to be built? It's the
Well,
same.
some of it's going to be built.
The same, but look over the past 10, 15 years. A lot of the potential still existed to be built, but it wasn't built. We have one of the things that's gone really well for New York City, unlike the 80s, you know, when we were building a lot of speculative office buildings, we've either the financial markets and or the development community has been pretty good at building only what the demand has been. And if you look over the past 12 years, we've been in a situation we've actually self-monitored or self-regulated to a bit.
You know what? There was this committee of 35, I believe, who in the late 1990s, who were out there and they were trying to figure out different locations that they were going to build. Part of it was Long Island City, the
Chuck
Hudson
Schumer's
Yards
group that Chuck Schumer's group that he had.
Yeah, Chuck Schumer's group over there, and you know. But we do know that the Trade Center space is going to happen. We don't know if there's going to be another Chase Manhattan Tower over there because Chase Manhattan really doesn't need it. They're taking some of the Bear Stearns space over here. What happens 5 years from now? On the actual plan, and I'm not even talking about the Hudson Yards, will that space be absorbed?
If you ask me, I say yes.
I'm asking all of you.
Absolutely.
I would say this: in Lower Manhattan, especially if you look at the city in downtown, you had 13 million feet lost in 9/11, tragically. You have another 14 million feet or so that was taken out of service and converted to residential. So 27 million feet of space, about 20% of the whole market in Lower Manhattan. I don't know how many. And filled. It wasn't empty, it was filled. I don't know how many cities could even recover from that, much less prosper. And if you look at it, we need to replenish that office supply because you can't have a city that's growing if it's shrinking. I mean, sort of intuitive. And in order to really bring back some of the businesses that were lost in Lower Manhattan, but even to New York, to accommodate the businesses, you need to have great office buildings and to grow, to accommodate these huge tenants. And 20 years ago, anybody thought that Times Square would ever become, quote, Wall Street, where you have Proskauer Rose and you've got all the you know, Morgan Stanley, and you've got Lehman Brothers.
Look
they went there because there were huge, big spaces that could accommodate them, not because it was Times Square.
There are huge spaces on 8th Avenue also. One that's being built right now under Totally Spec, which I'm pretty certain, knowing Steve Pizicki, he will lease it. He will find some people. He's in the market over there. You know, Boston Properties, they are a very astute company. They're building on 55th, 56th Street. That building's happening. They have some tenants in space. You have Related in Boston on 46th Street and 8th Avenue. And then you have the Vornado, which is going to happen, Vornado on top of the, on Times Square, 20 Times Square. So you have a number of square footage going in Midtown. And I still remember a couple of guys who have been on my show saying, you know what, I really don't like going downtown. I really like being in Midtown. And now Midtown has got to 8th Avenue. At one time, Midtown was 6th Avenue. You know, people said I didn't really want to go to 8th Avenue. But today, the Times building, these other properties, you know, it's going to change. And as you know, I'm very bullish on the market, but I'm cautious optimism. And, you know, that's possibly it. I mean, you represent a lot of tenants. What do you see? Do you see these tenants looking at 8th Avenue today as much as...
Well, sure. I mean, we did a bunch of the deals at 620 at the Times building, and I thought that was just a very revolutionary shift for law firms to be going to that location. And it's, you know, it's part of it is that very high quality architecture will always drive demand. You know, people want to be in good, well-designed buildings, so you always have that leading the market. And I agree completely with Ken. I mean, I think the city needs lots of additional construction. I think that it's a necessity for the growth of the economy. And I think that either 2 or 3 of those projects should definitely go forward for the city to be healthy. The question is which one and in what sequence. It puts a certain level of uncertainty over the future market because we don't know whether the rail yards project is going to go forward. Moynihan Station is extremely up in the air right now. Downtown's very hard to visualize which of those alternative things are going to happen and in which sequence. So it's hard to forecast.
What about the Westchester market, which we briefly discussed before? 20 years ago, the rents in Westchester were $30 a square foot, and today they're still $30 a square foot. And you've lived this market for years. What do you see happening in that market?
It's a very viable alternative, White Plains in particular, and that whole 287 corridor. We're seeing a lot of activity coming out of Manhattan, going north. The rents are reasonable, the commute is good. You find a lot of people who live in Westchester having alternative offices up there. Some of the law firms are starting to do that.
What about Stanford?
Stanford's...
I mean, RBS has made a commitment to Stanford. And, there's a lot of property. RFR bought a lot of property. They bought the FD Rich property.
One thing about Manhattan, though, it's the centrality of it that makes it so remarkable. I mean, it's close to everything. Everything is essentially a hub. It's a hub for everything. So Westchester is good, too, but Connecticut starts being a little bit off to the side of the hub, if you know what I mean. And so we don't find that people put that at the top of their list the way that they would downtown or Jersey City or
But how many people say, I want to be in Jersey City? I mean, you as a great company, Studley or Cushman or Hemsley, or you give them alternatives. I mean, how many? I remember Steve Pizicki saying, when Wiley moved to Hoboken, they had been here in New York for 150 years. I mean, there were a lot of changes. I don't see all these new companies going down to Jersey today as much as they were before, partially because of what you said. People want to be the central location.
Well, look, New York is an incredible draw, and if you had your druthers, I mean, everybody would like to be clustered in Midtown. There's no question that an enormous amount of business gets done by people walking around in what they call agglomeration economies. It's being close by other people is very, very important, and it never will be eliminated. In the old days, they visualized office buildings out in cornfields, with people with internet connections, and it just doesn't work that way. People want to be close to each other, and I do more work walking up and down Park Avenue than I do anyplace else. So it's a very, very strong driver. What I would say is that technology has also changed subtly in that a lot of back office operations that used to be expensive to put elsewhere can now be put remotely without nearly the same level of costs. Like accounting, we talked about this before. It used to be you had to go to accounting to get a check. Or a financial statement. I don't get either of those things anymore. It's direct deposit, and everything shows up on the computer.
A couple of weeks ago, I had lunch with Alan Goldman of SJP Residential, and I said, "What?" He told me his son is with IBM. So I said, "Where does he work?" He said, "He works out of his house." And basically, that hotel concept. A lot of the accounting firms today do not need as much space in Midtown as they used to have, because the people can plug into a different desk, they can be remotely over there. Doesn't that have an effect on the office space need?
Absolutely. And I would say alternative workplace strategies is the most single hot concept in the tenant rep world. I mean, people are looking at more effective ways. I talked to a client the other day, and they said that usually they thought that they'd have 50% of their people in the office on Friday, which was the big day. They found that it was 25% of their people who were in the office, and the balance of the week was even less. So that's more of a threat to the economy, I think, or to the office economy than any other single factor, because there is a tendency for people to want to use space more effectively.
Well, that's completely changing the way in which we work. Where residential becomes much more a factor or a home office than just a pure, office market than the way we used to be. And that's going to be here.
So who's moving downtown today? I mean, you own a lot of property, you're representing a lot of tenants you're representing. Who's moving downtown? I mean, a couple of years ago that people moved downtown because of the substantial cost savings. Do we see that still happening today?
Well, if you look at, if you look at the leases that are going to be turning in 2008 this year and 2009 and 2010, and you look at where their basis was when they started, the only way they can even be remotely competitive to where they are, or consistent rather, to the rents that they have today, is to move to alternative locations other than Midtown, because Midtown's rents have skyrocketed so much. So the rents that one is achieving downtown in the mid to upper 40s is where maybe Midtown was 10 years ago. Same city, same infrastructure, same everything. It's just, and I think that's as much perception as it is anything
I believe
else.
My friend over here represents Joe Simone, and he's building up in the Bronx.
We like the Bronx too.
Right. I mean, and Taconic.
Anywhere your clients are.
No. And Taconic
it's very active, actually.
No. And Taconic made a major investment by buying the banknote building in the Bronx. And a part of that, as I've said to Charles And to Paul, part of my big problem is that nonprofit organizations, and I know you've represented a number of them over the years, they need space.
Right.
And they, and the mission of the nonprofit is to operate efficiently. And for a nonprofit, and I've had fights with certain nonprofit organizations saying, you don't need to be on 59th Street. You can be at 111 8th Avenue. You can be up at the American Banknote. I mean, where do these companies who really have to save money, they don't need that corporate structure, where should they go?
They're going to go everywhere they can go. You've seen a trend amongst advertising companies in the first quarter. They've actually leased more space than financial services companies have. They're struggling to stay in Manhattan. And if they can't, they're going to look elsewhere.
But you just named two of the types of tenants that have gone downtown a lot in our buildings. We've got a lot of nonprofits. We have a lot of advertising agencies. We have a lot of architectural firms, accounting firms. Anybody, I would say if you're a private company, smaller private company, and you're looking where you have to make your money, obviously, on the bottom line, and you can be in a very good office building in Manhattan, but it maybe not be in Midtown, why wouldn't you look alternatively at downtown or even Brooklyn or somewhere like that?
I mean, let's look at how many leases in 2007 and 2008 were signed at Hudson Square. I mean, Hudson Square all of a sudden became a major location. I mean, 1010 Winds, where I do my show, the only reason that they're not downtown yet, they've signed the lease, is they don't have enough electrical power to put them in. The grid isn't strong enough.
Hudson Square's been hot, and as I said, creative firms with low profit margins are struggling to stay
publishing,
in Midtown.
Newsweek, obviously.
Printing, publishing.
That's a significant business that the editorial staff wants to remain in Manhattan. They like it here. Publishing can sometimes go either way, but the publishers would prefer to be close to the editorial people if they had their choice. And these are just paper-thin margin businesses in some cases. And so there's going to be a very strong impetus, I think, for them to look downtown. And I think the Newsweek transaction is indicative of a trend.
No, I think that, and I really emphasize, because I've said this so many times, that the nonprofit organizations, which I've said they should have gone to Jersey, to Long Island City, or to other places, because they don't need certain of the back office. I mean, they're
pitching a lot. They're pitching a lot of clients, and
right.
and if the
money is here,
right, and the money's here, and
see, that's the point.
And when people are traveling into New York, they need the convenience. They may not need 59th Street, but they do. That's one thing that people have shown. Moving outside of New York, they lose a little bit of the edge, the efficiency, and how many meetings can you have in a day. So there is something clearly to be in Manhattan.
We'll have a Regency headquarters, we'll have a shared office where all the nonprofits can go.
We should do what Silverstein did, is that we should have not-for-profit
nonprofits.
Condos rather downtown that allow people to get off the tax rolls, and I think that that's a savvy developer is going to come up with a couple, three of those buildings downtown in the near future.
Since we have about a minute, I want your final comment on how do you see the end of the year taking place? You have 10 seconds to say
10
this.
seconds. Capital markets still a little bit slow. Leasing market will struggle through the year. Leasing will probably be off about 5 to 6%.
I think we're going to see some significant reduction in rents, and tenants will get some long-deserved respite from the increases.
I think we celebrate that the end of 2008 occurred, going into a nice 2009. Although I think asking rents may go down a little bit, but I don't think any of the taking rents are going down.
Okay, I'd like to thank Joe Harbert, Mike Colaccino, and Ken Swig. Next week, we leave the office market and we go to the restaurant world. See you next week.
Major funding for these programs is provided by grants from First American Title Insurance Company of New York, Perfect Building Maintenance, Murray Hill Properties, Bank of America, SJP Properties, Allied Partners, Greenberg Traurig LP. Additional funding is provided by grants from Arbor Realty Trust, Antares Investment Partners, Athena Group, BRT Realty Trust, Burden LLP, CB Richard Ellis, City Habitats, City Investment Fund, Cushman and Wakefield, Eastern Consolidated, Essex Capital Partners, Gemini Real Estate Advisors LLC, Herrick Feinstein, Helmsley Spear, Jackson Development Group, John Katzimatidis, Herbert J. Sims Company, James D. KUHN Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, Kilroy Metal Products, Madison Realty Capital, Marcus and Millichap, Meridian Capital Group, M&T Bank, MUSS Development, LLC, Newmark Knight Frank, Palin Enterprises, Rosenthal and Rosenthal, Sidney FETNER Associates, Sheldrake Organization, Signature Bank, Studley, the Moynihan Organization, Triangle Services, the WITKOFF Organization, Extreme Contracting and Deconstruction.